Hi, I'm Ronit Kirchman. I'm here with Kaya from Film.Music.Media, and we're going to talk about film and TV scoring tonight. We're going to look at some recent projects of mine, including Pretty Little Liars Summer School and Fractal and many more.
Yeah, well, Ronit, thank you so much for inviting me to your studio here. It's so great to finally sit down with you because it's been, it's been 6 years since our last chat.
Yes, so, that's true.
So it's been, so I'm kind of going to treat this like, for anybody discovering this new, like we might revisit some old things about your past and your background. But before we jump into that, I always like to start conversations off with this question now. And you can take this at surface level, you can take this as deep and spiritual or whatever, how you want to take it. But as a human being, as a storyteller, as a composer, as a musician, what does music mean to you?
I love that question. It's kind of, I think it's one that I visit every day, actually.
Yeah.
The simplest way to encapsulate, I think, would be to say that music is like breath for me. I think that when I chose to kind of make music my creative focus, I have a lot of creative loves, but I was like, what is the thing that so on a personal level, it's like the breath. Like, what do I need in my life every day to sustain me? What can I not live without?
Right.
So, and then, that's just on the individual level. And I think the reason why I am always inspired and I always connect with it is because I feel like it's this bridging medium between, like, it includes so much that is very imperfect and very concrete and very human, perfectly imperfect. And it also has the potential to connect us with the transcendent and the sublime, you know. And so I think the fact that it embodies the, I think, human potential at its best, to connect with other people, it's very social, there's a lot of movement, and there's an X factor to, it requires living, breathing, communicating to exist, right? There's nothing static about it.
Right.
So I think, it is very spiritual in its essence. It's supposed to be the ether element that it belongs to in the kind of yoga system. So
yeah, absolutely. No,
that always has spoken to me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious now. I want to rewind back to kind of early in your life, and I'm curious. Do you remember the point in your life where either you found music or music found you? Was it like a kind of catalyst moment, or was it kind of something that took place over time that you finally got pulled into? I'm curious. Like, how did you get pulled into this before it became a career, like as an interest or a hobby?
Right, when we're kids.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're not all the way thinking toward professional planning yet. I would say as far back as I can remember, it was very much part of my way of being. So I've realized that again because I found some old recordings of me as a 3-year-old making up songs. Like, songwriting for me was actually one of the first generative things I did, both lyrics and songs.
Were you in a musical family, or were you?
Yes, not professionally,
right.
but my dad is a great improvising pianist, just because,
just 'cause,
And when I was growing up, so the recording I found is of me, singing with my dad at the piano. And violin, I started at age 4, and I requested that instrument. So the story goes, we watched a lot of orchestral performances on TV at home, and my mom said, I pointed at the violin every single time, and I was like, that one. And she had some not so great experiences as a beginner violin student, and so she tried to convince me not to go there.
Push you away a little bit.
And then finally she relented. So I think that it's something I'm fascinated by, not just for me as a musician artist, but kind of for each of us, how there are these innate gifts and tendencies and passions that somehow are in there. So I've found out that there, if we go back a couple generations, like apparently there was a violin prodigy in Eastern Europe who was a cousin of my grandmother. So there are definitely musical kind of professional threads in the mix.
Yeah.
But my immediate, I definitely was forging my own path in terms of the career that I chose.
Yeah.
I remember in college, while I was also, and I still am, like really passionate about fine art, visual art, also where the two meet,
Right.
and writing. And I had not, I was basically going to take everything as technically excellent as I could, and keep all the balls juggling as long as I could.
Right.
I think what I saw around me was a lot of kind of professional kind of choices that are a little bit more societally acceptable, like doctors and teachers, and architecture I'm very passionate about as well.
Yeah.
And so when I first got to college, I thought, I might be an architect. And I remember at some point in my sophomore year realizing like, I think I'm an artist.
Time to forego security and job security.
Yes. But what's interesting is I feel like I've ended up, there's the famous Goethe quote about music and architecture, I think, being frozen music. I hope I'm not misquoting. But I do sometimes compare music for film to the job of an architect, because you have a very important collaboration going on with your client.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you don't want to be building what they call paper architecture. You want to not just make scores without a client. The real juice and the joy is with making the thing with your client.
Integrated into the structure.
Yes, and letting their stories really kind of take up residence in you for a while and change you. What's been surprising, I think, is the degree to which the collaboration has been, even when, of course, there's notes, there's always things that you might feel like, I would have done something maybe a little different, or elements of compromise. Yeah. Ultimately, I feel like I really thrive in that collaborative environment, and it's rather than, it makes sense in that like there's tons of creative people around you, so of course, right?
Yeah.
But the way that it kind of awakens me to aspects of myself, even musically, there's a ton of music that I've made that I feel like if I were in a vacuum, it just would not have happened, and that is really the essence of music itself anyway, is that kind of dynamic connecting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I'm curious now, like kind of going back a little bit again, you talked about how it kind of entered your life. When did you, was there like a moment, like this is going to be my career path and I'm an artist now, but like, what were the first steps you took to make this a career? Yeah.
So I would say it started immediately after graduating from college. I grew up in New York City and I moved back. And I kind of fell into, I definitely was like, I went to Yale, which at the time was an amazing music school, but did not have very robust electronic music. Mm-hmm. And so I knew, I want to learn engineering. I would set up my own studio with synthesizers, because I'd, gotten my first synth when I was 11.
Wow.
And so I was always like obsessed with that and thirsty for that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to study guitar, and I studied jazz guitar and various other styles. So I knew that at least on the educational spectrum, I was interested in kind of filling gaps and keeping learning.
Yeah.
And then I kind of have always had a lot of friends in like theater, film, actors, writers. That kind of vibe has attracted me, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's funny because my first theater score, I did a lot of scores for theater in the few years that I was there before grad school.
Yeah.
And I kind of fell into it. I had a friend who's a great director who was like, would you be my dramaturg? It was this like very interesting show, sourced in some New York historical events. And so I was like, sure, why not?
Yeah.
But then it turned out that the play needed a lot of sound design and a lot of music. So, and he was like, hey, you got a great studio. Hey, you want to be the music director and the composer and the sound designer? And I was like, yes. So that kind of led to a whole bunch of productions, including some musical theater, some immersive experimental theater. So, also included music directing and vocal coaching.
Yeah.
I really loved, I think the theater thing was an awesome way to start for me because of the really close, and it's not like piecemeal, like a little bit film, when you're working on a film, you do spend a lot of time by yourself. But like my experience out of the gate working, composing for narrative was a lot of life, a lot of personalities, a lot of stuff. So at some point, hopefully that kind of the Broadway show will, manifest in the future. But I think that like that early exposure made me feel very comfortable with, I guess, different kinds of people with different roles. And I was often, leading the band in the performance or, you name it. So it kind of, it was always interesting and very varied. And so, but I also felt that like there were, most of the jobs were like writing bumpers for scene transitions. Mm-hmm. And I was like, but there's a world out there where you can like do epic soundscapes for like, the world of film. And it was before the real golden age of TV. So I think, but there was that canvas there. So I was like, I definitely want to do that. And I had, not to overcomplicate, but I also did comedy writing, like writing during that time. And I felt that was a little bit the time when I think that question came up for me of what can I not live without? And it was not like writing jokes or like,
That wasn't driving you.
Well, it was driving me, but not to the degree that I like couldn't imagine a world where I wasn't pitching jokes to somebody. Right. But I really couldn't imagine a world where I was not picking up my instrument every day or singing every day, or, So, or like messing around with knobs and. So, but I did still, I applied to one grad school because I was like, that's the place I want to go. But I went through a decision process if I was going to apply to the animation school or the composition school. And I think, again, it really boiled down to that. I imagined myself like, I was a cartoonist and a painter in college and had a lot of ideas. Again, still hopefully this will all come back as I continue my journey. But I kind of felt like I couldn't see myself poring over, cells and infinitesimal images and not having time or music being some sort of side thing. Yeah. It was always like, I'm not the sideshow, I'm the main.
Right. Yeah.
So I think grad school was definitely the biggest kind of decision point of
kind of put things into focus.
That's the professional school. Although I really went to grad school for music on its own terms rather than film scoring. I kind of felt like I felt very comfortable collaborating. And so for me, grad school was like the deep dive into whatever I felt like I needed to experience more of musically.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was your first, I guess, entryway into like kind of film or TV? Was it, and when did you make this trip out here to kind of move your life from New York to LA?
I moved out here. This is definitely going to date me, but like late 99. I had applied and gotten accepted to Cal Arts. And so I was ready to do my MFA in composition and new media. I learned to drive in New York, and then I took the driving test out here. Like, that's how much of a New Yorker I was.
Well, if you can drive in New York, you can drive out anywhere.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
you
true.
can do New York City. You can.
Oh, right. It's very intense. You experience all the human emotions.
In 10 seconds.
Yes. So that was the big move, I think. And then in terms of getting into film specifically, my second year of grad school, I assisted at a big studio and was kind of double timing it. So that was very hard on I was, I'm not sleeping at all.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot about that workflow on a big scale.
Yeah.
And again, a little bit, it's interesting, like certain things kind of fell into my lap that got me started. Like I had a friend who was, directing a film, and they were looking for somebody to score it, and he forwarded me the email. And so that, I think it was 2000, it was right after grad school. But my basic feeling was like, I had many friends and colleagues in the film scoring world, and I felt like I made a choice, I guess, a very clear choice to be like, I'm going to do the thing where you do the thing at an amazing smaller level with a smaller budget, but you get to be the point person for the storytelling. I think it was very much influenced by the fact that in the theater, like I was that person. I was not assisting or writing somebody else's voice. Right. And like that's always what motivated me from kind of age zero. I felt like I was hearing things that I wasn't hearing out there that I needed to make. So I guess I was kind of impatient and somewhat idealistic on the career front.
Yeah.
And perhaps I could have had a shorter ascent in certain ways, but I spent quite a while like working on indie films. That was kind of how I cut my teeth.
Yeah.
And so on the plus side, I was always that person who was having the conversation, the creative conversation. I think that it took a little bit longer, and also, the landscape has changed quite a bit, but it took a little bit longer to kind of, for people to recognize
Yeah.
We should think about Ronit.
So when you're starting out, like at that point in your career, are you even thinking about because I feel like as a storyteller and as a musician, I mean, you have such a, your identity, like your voice as a musician, as a storyteller. Were you thinking about that like that early in your career, going like, what's my sound? How am I going to differentiate myself from all the other composers out there? Like, is that something that you were thinking about, or were you just like trying to just cut your teeth and trying to grab a project that you were passionate about and not even thinking about like, what am I going to sound like? You were just going with instinct and not thinking about that.
I felt, there are many areas where I think some of the, let me try to think about how I answer it. I think there are many areas where I felt like I needed to have experience to build confidence.
Yeah.
However, one place where I felt like I've always really had the confidence, like always, was in, and I'm like, should I say this? It sounds so like bold, but I really feel like I've always had creative confidence because I feel like I'm hearing something. Yeah. I know that what I have to offer is original.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling like, not just for the sake of being original, but I think that when I experience work that I feel like is inspired, it opens my mind to possibilities that are exciting. And I feel like that really we consider and think like, why are we doing this? Is it helping the world? And I do feel like one of the big potentials for music is, and especially actually in its interaction with story, if it's impactful and it works, but it works in a way that is not cookie cutter.
Right.
but it still gives you all, like, I'm big into emotional impact. So it's like if it really gives you those big feels and the whole ride, but you didn't know how it was going to happen because maybe there's something new about it.
Right.
Like that, I think it's A, inspiring, and B, mind-opening in ways that are, kind of like non-didactic, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I felt like the other thing is that, like, I feel like very strongly about how we have a signature, right?
Yeah.
But it's not fixed in terms of some of the external style specifics, right?
Sure.
So, like, I don't always reach for certain harmonic changes, you know what I mean? Or consider, like, this style I feel comfortable with, this style not. On some level, the style is not really the object. So it's an interesting question of, like, if you're a versatile film composer, then you are a shapeshifter. So how do you have your voice? But you do, because it's kind of a meta signature. And I remember reading really early on something that really resonated with me. And it was right around when he passed away. The director, Louis Malle, I was reading some of his interviews. I had a dream about him, and he passed. Like, it was like right like that, right? So, and then I was like, I got to read everything that he read and see all of his movies. And in one of the interviews, he said, I make all these different films, and people will ask me, like, what is the thread that holds them all together? And he's like, I just tell them me. And he's just like, I think just that his work, yes, but also just like the attitude about art making and what a voice is, that I really kind of vibed with that, because he wasn't like, I saw this kind of movie, I knew I had to make that for the rest of my life. And so the idea that you can inhabit different stories, it's kind of like actors as well. Like the actors I am inspired by, it's them, but
right.
but it's amazing too.
I know. Especially when you see actors who, like, I remember when Robin Williams would do drama versus comedy, like, you'd see, like, him go into different, it's like, it's his acting, but it's like you see him on a different side, a completely different side.
Right.
And he's tackling whatever the character is. It's not about him doing his style or his way of acting. It's like
But his soul.
Yeah, his soul's there.
Yeah. For those who celebrate. I think there's kind of an energetic well or source that each person has that kind of speaks through different stories.
Absolutely.
So I feel grateful to have, I think when you're younger and you feel like that, it can feel so stressful and angsty because you're like, I need to do this.
Right. You're finding yourself, you're finding your place in the world. You're still figuring yourself out too. Like, it's not just you. Yeah. I remember when I first moved out here, and it's just like, what do I want to do? It's like not really up to you. You kind of just like, for me, I was like, I'm now in animation. I never sought out this path. It's just like, I'm doing it for 9 years.
Well, and it's interesting. Sometimes things find you. Like these times when I definitely was like doing the stuff, but to have certain, doesn't matter what the size is really, but like something that was creatively inspiring that kind of like landed on my doorstep, like, hey, you want to do this?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I guess it's time to start.
Right.
So
we were talking about kind of your origins and finding your path and and finding your voice and fast forward a bit, and you've built this career now over the past couple decades, and do you ever look back at like stuff from the past, like, and you're working on a project now, like, if you look back, like, for instance, I'm looking at the poster for Sinner here, which was a huge successful series, and kind of we're talking about the golden age of TV, and that was like an amazing show, and now years pass, then you've been kind of stepped away from it. Do you ever look back at something like that and go, oh yeah, what was I doing here? Like, do you recognize that Ronit who's scoring that?
Who was scoring that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a mixed relationship with like going back.
Yeah.
While we were still, I mean, for all intents and purposes, that show is kind of like not coming back unless it were to magically happen, you know,
Unless it has a
20 years
revival
down
on
the line or
Netflix,
something
like Suits or
that.
something, and it
Right,
blows up
exactly,
again.
exactly. So during the period of time that I was in it, I was very in it and kind of, I would take breaks between seasons, and it was kind of my own mandate, honestly, to really have each season have a different language that was like building on the previous season, but also introducing brand new themes, instruments, and then so it was, I mean, I think for a composer, TV is just such an amazing medium when you get multiple seasons, because, and especially with this kind of anthology with continuity.
Right.
You know, it wasn't this kind of thing where, okay, we're going to cut stuff from season one. You know, whenever stuff was cut in from season one and season two, I'd be like, yeah, we're going to change it. Right? So, and I think that like, as we continued in that way, it, like people became fans of that approach for the show, because it kept it new, and like they're new characters. Why should they sound the same, right?
Right.
And the conflicts are, the focus of the psychic conflicts evolve and are different. Anyway, that said, I think, you know, we finished in, I think, late 21. And so from like those like 4 years, 5 years, I kind of felt like I was swimming in that ocean.
Yeah.
And there was a benefit to kind of keeping certain things alive. But it was a great way actually to kind of evolve my template and my workflow. So I'd be like, okay, great, we wrapped that season now. How am I going to kind of improve the workflow for the next? And I think, there are technically, I feel like the nuts and bolts of how I did stuff, a lot of it is like you spend so much like blood, sweat, and tears in there.
Yeah.
Like I actually do remember, it's kind of very present for me. It's surprising, you know. So it still lives, but I don't feel a need to revisit that often. But it's also kind of like all in my body anyway.
Like, have you never been just sitting there curious, just go like play an episode and just see what you did, or have you ever done that? I
mean, I did at the time. I care a lot about the balance, so I'd watch the shows to see how I felt the dub went and stuff like that. So of course I always watch when it comes out.
Sure.
Once in a while, I'll be kind of curious. Or I want to remember something about sometimes about the story of a certain episode, wanting to remember. So yeah.
Well, you know, maybe when your kids start find some of your stuff, then you'll get to revisit through different eyes. Yeah.
It's true. It's funny because they are still pretty small.
Yeah, they're still young.
So they most of my stuff they probably shouldn't watch yet.
Yeah, a little too young.
But they always ask about it, and sometimes I'll kind of break down the some of the plot points in broad strokes.
Yeah, that's cool that they're showing interest, though.
Yeah, for sure. I think, who knows? Maybe they've sneakily watched some of it already.
Well, let's jump to some current projects, because I wanted to congratulations on Pretty Little Liars Summer School, which is the season 2 of what was Original Sin. And so you're jumping in, and Joseph Bashara did season 1, so you're coming in. So talk about that process of coming onto this project. What was it like? Because, what was it like jumping in like that, something that was already getting established? And of course, Pretty Little Liars is a little bit more big franchise. So in terms of your perspective, what was it like coming in, and what was your approach for this season?
Well, it actually was like very smooth and happy, I guess. Yeah. The producers of the show had, like, I knew that they were kind of fans of my work and were interested in finding a way to work with me at some point. And so, there are different reasons why that hadn't happened yet, but when they reached out about this, I was excited that they, still felt that way.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like what was nice just from a personal POV is that there was, I could make all new music.
Yeah.
So I know the first season was very successful, and, it's kind of not up to me, but like here I am. And for me, I think the ability to kind of work from scratch is really important.
Sure.
So I felt great that they were they gave me a free hand, and they didn't ask me to kind of work in existing elements.
They didn't put you in a box or give you like a, to.
No, I mean, I had to demo. And, you never know with demos, like you just have to kind of vibe it out and hope that the spaghetti is the right spaghetti, and Bloody Rose, like the theme for Bloody Rose was one of my pitch pieces that I made. And it's actually on the soundtrack, and we ended up using it. So I think that like something about the kind of, we ended up having a really big, exciting palette that included like, metal guitars and like classic 80s horror and kind of contemporary pop synth
it's
stuff.
A fun score. Like
Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Like I love it. Like the textures that you did, and it feels very kind of tactile. Like you can feel everything, and it's just, the way it moves and stuff. I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think that, I haven't worked on a YA-centric. I mean, I think it has a lot of grown-up fans for sure, because I've met some of them actually.
Yeah, I'm sure
some of them are my colleagues. But it was really a great way to engage with that genre, because it's the characters have a lot of meta-awareness.
Yes.
And so how do you thread the needle? Tonally, it's a great kind of both creative and intellectual project, because you don't want to be writing down. You have to honor their experience. And if you're a teenage girl, like things are in bright, saturated colors emotionally. Yes. And also just like the scalability, like certain things that seem like, not the biggest deal are a huge deal at that age emotionally.
Sure.
But also, like at the same time, to situate it in a horror slasher environment is so awesome, because truthfully, like the stuff that they have to face is insane and like horrifying. And so there's a reason to push those extremes, and then to get to play with like when you take those kind of emotional extremes and just like weave them into, kind of daily life with relationships and stuff. It opens up, I think, a lot of empathy actually in a very heightened way. And a lot of comedy, obviously. So it was a nice mix. And I think for sure the fact that it was ensemble cast with like a lot of themes, like each couple had a theme, or more, one or two. And each girl gets tested, and the language of the test action sequences is kind of dialed in for the language of that girl, from the beginning. So it provided all these avenues for developing musical materials. And it's also like a lot of music per episode.
Yeah, how much music?
I mean, it's pretty much, there's some great song placements, and then there's not a lot of non-scored.
Yeah.
It's like, 40 minutes an episode. I mean, average.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a heavy lift.
So did you have
especially those big action sequences? They're like,
yeah,
because you start out at least 8, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to turn it up to like 12 or 13.
Exactly. I know. Yeah. And the show allows you to go kind of up that high, and kind of allows you to be that big.
Yeah. Which was fun, because I feel like, for example, compared to something like The Sinner, which is so, the palette it's very in depth. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very subtle.
Yeah.
And it's not horror, although there are times when things are
suspenseful and
deeply horrifying, maybe. Yeah. But it's a different it's a different relationship to culture and to making stuff in a way.
Yeah.
And this kind of, I think I had a lot of fun with like people. I think the EP is just they have an encyclopedic knowledge of horror, and so that was fun to engage with.
Yeah. When you're writing for the entire season, you were talking about just how much music per episode, and you have all these different themes for different couples and stuff like that. How do you keep going back, the architecture of the entire structure of the season in your head? Did you have the entire season already to kind of laid out to you? Did you have outlines or scripts to read, or so you knew where it was going?
Yes.
Right.
So definitely, like, first thing I did was read all the scripts.
Yeah.
We worked on the first 6 episodes that had been shot before the actor strike, and then we had to pick back up early this year to do the last 2. But yeah, definitely, like, all the story arcs were there.
Right.
And I think I always do that. I think it's very important to have a zoomed out view of how characters evolve, what happens to them.
Yeah, the big picture of that. You need to have that in your head. Do you have that in your head the entire time, or do you kind of let that go to focus on like episode to episode? I'm just going to leave that behind and just focus on these moments.
It's a good question. I think that it's a little bit like walking through life. There are times when you really have to drop in and be in the moment, but you also have to like inform yourself. You've kind of planned, let's say, like maybe you've planned your day.
Yeah,
right?
No, I like that. Yeah, you planned your day.
And as you have to trust your whole being to like hold the data, right?
Yeah.
And it's in there. Yeah. Like if you've done it's also a little bit like actors, right? You've done the prep. Maybe you've researched, and like there's always different kinds of research that I do, like or musicians do.
Sure.
So I watched a ton of horror films that I hadn't seen, like, you name it, and kind of thinking about, that's maybe an interesting sidebar of like, how do you pay homage without being a sound-alike? Because that did come up, as something that I think like I wanted to find solutions for that would, still be kind of new sounding, but also check the box of connecting to those horror classics. But that's like, separate conversation, I guess.
I know that.
But I mean, so you do all this research, and it's kind of in your somatic memory as well as your brain. And then I think that when you kind of drop into the scene, also I've made certain choices that are kind of combo intuitive and cerebral, right? Like a little bit just also it's like writing, right? You especially with TV, but just in general, if it's a even if it's character-driven plot, but there's a lot of plot points that really need to kind of pay off, you really have to plan those out. And you have to, as you're planning, it's not just top-down. It's like you have to feel your way through that and see if it's working, right? So I do kind of repeatedly, I think it's like a spiral that I get more and more used to. Like the novelty of the zoom in, zoom out has maybe worn off a little because I'm so familiar that that's like what we always have to do. So it's like a focus pull, you're constantly macro, micro.
Right.
And checking in with, sometimes if I sketch out, even if I know, okay, well, this section I have a lot more, like I need to beef it up a lot, I have to orchestrate this a lot more. But after I've kind of laid in some color patches, then I zoom out and see, of course, like how have we gotten here and where are we going? And is it setting things up right? And before I start really fleshing out certain builds, for example, I mean, it's kind of an insane amount of work that goes into creating that density of sound.
Yeah.
You might be surprised to like see what stems are in there in the mix,
Yeah.
Especially when the note that you get back is like more, and you're like, more? How did I do that? It's like, so it's like the mastering engineer's equivalent of like, how do you maximize, like, how do you really deliver more density of sound and energy. So, so hopefully that gives you an idea. I mean, I think there's also like that middle distance where maybe you have certain themes to work with, and you're thinking about how to reframe them, or how to let them morph into what they need to be in this new episode, where, a lot of reveals, a lot of changes.
Also, I think your writing background probably helped as well, because especially if you're coming from a comedy writing background, I think comedy and horror are so intertwined because it's all timing.
I'm so glad that you say that.
And structure,
I think it's so
because
true.
it is. I think comedy and horror are probably like the hardest things to do, because it is timing. It is, and it's a lot of subjective things, because some people find something funny, other people will not. Some people find something scary and be like, oh, that's stupid, that's not scary. So
Right.
how do you try to pull those emotions out of the audience? And we saw it successfully, like with Halloween, where Danny McBride and David Gordon Green came in. They have comedy backgrounds. They're writing these horror screenplays. So, but then I also wanted to also jump into that tangent you were talking about homaging, which I thought was interesting that you went and watched all these horror movies, because I've talked to some composers where they're like, if they're doing something, they want to block that out of their minds because they feel they might subconsciously start doing something.
Have something.
Yeah, like I'm not going to watch, if they're doing a remake, I'm not going to watch the original. Or if they're not going, I'm not gonna, or a sequel, I'm not going to watch. But this is like more of a genre thing, I guess. So you were looking at, so how did you create that palette to make sure it was you, but also kind of homaging the whole genre?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. And it takes I think it takes a lot of faith and discipline to be like, okay, I'm going to watch all this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I had seen quite a few, so I didn't necessarily need to revisit everything. And I will say that while actually writing the music for the episodes, and a lot of times, this is kind of a general thing for when I write, I kind of don't really listen to a lot of music outside. Yeah. I'm just kind of I'm trying to not, it's distracting.
Yeah, for sure.
And also just like mental health wise, it's very calming and palliative to have some silence in the interstitial moments when, the work is like all sound. So, so during the actual production process, the post-production process, I feel kind of like I wasn't really listening to a lot of stuff then, unless somebody was like, this is a reference point that we want you to be aware of, or whatever. But I don't even know how to explain it, but it's almost like you have to practice kind of non-attachment when you're listening and watching.
Yeah.
And identify, it's also kind of like a recipe, right? Which is, it's specific to genre writing, where my hope is if I'm engaging in a genre, I always want to add something new that's cool, I don't want to just imitate. But you also, it's a little bit like if you're, making something that's like a jazz piece or a blues piece, if you've never heard jazz or blues, you're not going to be
yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
You need some foundation, right? Yeah.
I mean, or people, it's we're all made of concrete stuff. Yeah. So at a certain point, you have to be willing to get specific. And so taking stuff in, I guess it's a matter of being really discerning. Okay, in this score, sometimes some of the stuff I was watching, not necessarily for score reference, but for story reference, because there would be Easter eggs or things that are, references to, and I felt like it's important to understand that, because sometimes there's a psychological resonance between the villain and some other film.
Yeah.
And, Bloody Rose or Archie, understanding the kind of the villain profiles. So sometimes it's story oriented, and when I watch something with that kind of orientation, it's easier to be whatever, we're not going to focus on, don't look over there at the score or whatever. But then, there was an episode that actually included, I think, about a minute of Friday the 13th in it. It has to kind of feel like of a piece, but also I really wanted the moment where they're actually factually doing that to kind of set itself apart a little bit, so that like, yes, it's all flow. Yes, it's all big action, scary thing. Yes, there's resonance with Friday the 13th. But I also kind of I think that, you kind of like, when you hear the piece from there, like, what that is,
right.
and then like it actually packs a punch as a reference, because you can identify it as separate a little bit, right? And it's also a little bit like the show itself, where there's one character who is, a very, very well versed in all horror film literature. And so as they're experiencing the story, she's like, oh, that's like this. Oh, that's like this.
Yeah. So
we should do this because that's going to be a mistake.
Right.
So I think, kind of being able to frame things. Sometimes it's about, pinpointing what instrumentation is used. So, if you have a similar instrument in the existing palette, like that might be a great moment, for example. Or like in the processing world, there was like when it's like so simple to do, but it's real, that is a little bit like in one of my favorite violin concertos, the Berg Violin Concerto, has like, big quotes in it. But it's like an amazing, amazing original piece. So it's like you can have that quote, or like when people sample, for a hip hop song, like that, it's the same kind of thing of okay, the idea of that particular little delay is something that is going to catch people's memory.
Right.
But it's not going to be identical, and there's a lot of stuff that's going to be different. But it's kind of like a little homage. So I think sometimes when you are like, see, like this is, remember this?
Yeah.
And it's packaged in a way that it like lives in this big world you've created that's not identical. Hopefully people get a kick out of it. That's the,
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I know it's, I mean, I love it. It's like almost not really, not pastiche or anything, but it's just like being influenced and just being immersed in that genre. I think it's so different than just like directly, I mean, you mentioned Friday the 13th, but just living in that genre and having the characters also acknowledge it and everything. And it's just a love letter to the genre.
Yeah. And I think like, if anything, some of these classic scores, they didn't have the tools to amp it up to the degree that we did.
Yeah.
So I think that part of the project was like, okay, but like more. So the more is definitely contemporary.
Yeah.
Like what's like super, super duper duper saturated, like, and I think that that's one of the hopefully distinguishing features.
For sure. So Pretty Little Liars, congratulations, fantastic show. So you can stream it on Max right now. But I want to move to some other projects that you worked on. You did 2 fantastic shorts, and I'm going to make sure I get their titles: User Zero and Fractal. So we've talked about scoring, something more long form like a season of television, and now short films. I think they get lumped in as more sometimes amateurish or almost student filmish, but like there are some amazing short films being made by amazing filmmakers, and I'm so glad there's like an Oscar category for them. And I think as we see this kind of contraction in the industry, I'm seeing more compilation anthology shows that are made up of shorts and stuff like that. And I think it's such a fantastic medium. So what was it like working on these shorts, and does it change your approach at all when you have less real estate to tell the story, or is it kind of the same? I'm curious from your perspective as a composer.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, short films are uniquely positioned in the market, so kind of not always have a place.
Yeah, it's hard to distribute, market,
Yes.
It's,
the 2 shorts that you mentioned, though, I feel like the amount of attention to detail and story development within, it's like an amazing miniature model, right? So it contains everything within it. And so, quality-wise, there are, of course, I think it's a genre where there are more amateur entries and offerings because of the price point.
Sure.
But, then there are shorts that are incredibly well supported, well funded, and made by master filmmakers.
Yes.
And I feel like those two films were like quality-wise felt really on the level and exciting and inspiring. I think in a weird way, the fact that it has to be so, like, every second counts. So there's not like some transition that's like, oh well, I would have like, every note really matters.
Yeah.
And so on that level, like with your collaborator, the filmmaker, it's a little almost higher pressure because this is the space we have to tell this story.
Right.
And so it's interesting. Edgar Varese has a quote that, again, I don't want to misquote, but he kind of talked about the density of time and how, like, an 8-minute piece of his can, or maybe it was somebody talking about his piece, but there's some of his pieces that are so dense with musical events and information that they feel longer than they are.
Sure.
So, I would say, like with Fractal, we had kind of robust enough funding that we were able to record with the Synchron Orchestra in Vienna, which is a great group. And that, is a 50-piece group. So, and it's kind of like the emotional scope of the film really, I felt like, required that kind of size ensemble to speak properly. Because there's certain things that you just need the orchestra to do.
Yeah, and the sound that you were able to put in that score, I mean, you sent me the soundtrack, and it's just fantastic, and it's just completely different world than Pretty Little Liars, completely different side of you, but it's just like, I mean, it felt like I was going on this, like, it was like a dreamlike journey, and it was just kind of, you were able to take up the space, and the orchestra filling the space. You could feel like the instruments and the players fill the void, essentially. Yeah.
That means a lot to me to hear. And that's what we were going for. The film is, in some ways, kind of the next quantum leap from the world of, Spielberg films from the 80s, but with a different kind of axis.
That Amblin kind of heart to it.
Yes. And so, it definitely was not something where we were going for a sound-alike or anything like that. But the idea of, yes, a child is at the center, but their imagination is huge and it needs to be able to express itself. And actually music, when you have a child's world, like, a lot of what's around them is not going to be huge.
Yeah.
But something needs to be there to really communicate that.
And in their mind, if you're from their perspective, it is huge. Like, everything is, their world's small, but everything is, everything is so much big. That's why when you're an adult, you look back, everything is relative. Like, why did an hour and a half feel like 5 hours back then? It's like, it's like.
Well, yeah, they've shown actually that, like, the brain changes and they, like, kids literally do experience time differently.
Yeah.
And the other really special aspect about this film was that the main character is deaf. And so, and paradoxically, of course, like, early on we kind of realized, like, oh, music is actually carrying a lot of the storytelling through line. There's not a lot of dialogue. I mean, it makes it very cinematic.
Yeah.
And then so the idea was not to imitate the experience of what it's like to, have very limited frequencies of hearing.
Right.
It was more about, like, well, what is music about that is resonant with this experience? And, we did do quite a bit of talking and research to people in the deaf community. And some of the things that emerged were, like, and it's also really clear when you look at the work of Evelyn Glennie, who's a deaf percussionist, like, pattern and rhythm and, like, the kind of physical aspect of vibration. So in a lot of ways, it kind of freed me up to be like, kind of paint pictures with these patterns. You know, they have pitches, but it was a very synesthetic kind of approach.
It was color. It was a colorful score. It
Right.
was You can again hear the colors. Like, you know, you could.
That's cool.
I mean, I don't have that. It is. I think Pharrell has it. It's like I think you just mentioned it, right? It's something where
I think that I kind of operate that way.
Yeah. So do you? Yeah. Do you hear in colors? Like, is that?
Yeah. So you know, there are people who associate a color with a pitch or a key center.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a little bit more loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
But when I'm imagining, I think it's just all woven together for me. So when I'm imagining an orchestration, I definitely am imagining like 3D, colorful movements
like
and textures and things.
Yeah, the way the instrument sounds, the way if it's a string or percussion, you know, it creates different things. Yeah.
And I kind of feel like on some level, even people who, you know, you're saying you're not synesthetic, but I think the brain is networked, right? So all of us are a little bit synesthetic. Like, maybe a certain harmony feels warm. I mean, that's already synesthetic, right?
That's true. Like, no, if you think about, like, if something is blue, it comes like a certain tone, maybe metallic or something. Like, you know, you can just say a color and kind of already find sounds in your brain that kind of match that. Yeah.
Yes. And, you know, one of my favorite books is Joseph Alber's Color Theory book. And it was something that was kind of like a foundational in college.
Yeah.
And a big part of it has to do with how we see color. And of course, it's very specific to the rods and cones and, you know, but the way we see color is very relative. It depends on what we have seen, what is next to another color, and we have, you know, there's some audio analogs to this, but there's after images. You see something and then it kind of and the color of that after image is not the same as what you saw. But it's influenced by. So that I mention it just because I think you know, the relativity of how we experience sound is real. It's just like also cutting scenes together, right? There's all those famous experiments where, you know, you reorder things and you cut things differently and it tells a different story.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So I think in terms of music and narrative, I like to kind of really consciously engage that kind of dynamism, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I was really grateful for Fractal, the fact that we could really match, because it has a lot of visual effects too, to match the quality and the support musically was pretty awesome, and it's very rare for a short film, I think.
I think so, because it has a scope that you wouldn't associate with, I think, a short, where you would say that. Like, but your score is just, it adds, I think, the scope too. Like, it's just such a big, and the emotions and again the colors and the textures, like, and the kind of it's completely different. It's not as, you know, pinpoint like Pretty Little Liars. It has more of kind of it forms and morphs and kind of has like a ebbs and flows to it. I really loved it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think you've been tending the creative flame with your projects, Ronit, and I want to thank you so much for such an insightful conversation and such a blast to come here and sit with you. And thank you so much.
I'm so glad this was super fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.